friends, today we will talk about China and trying to establish whether China is socialist or capitalist or whatever. Some people in the communist movement and some communist parties for that matter regard China as a socialist country. The CPA is one of these parties. The political resolution adopted at the party's recent Congress has this to say about China. China is a country with an economy dominated by state-owned enterprises where pursuit of profit is not the ultimate objective of economic development. In other words, China is a socialist country. The recent publication of the AMR, the CPA's theoretical journal, is entirely devoted to China and the achievements of socialism in China. One of the new leading academics in the CPA, in his article in the AMR, puts up the assumption that China is a socialist country. And he tries to prove that assumption by what the Chinese comrades say about themselves. He says, if you want to know the truth about China, read the newspaper of the Communist Party of China, and he lists a number of other Chinese publications. The paradox here is that we know that if you want to find the truth about any situation, first you must find the facts, examine the facts critically, and then arrive at a conclusion. Instead of doing that, what he does is he puts up the assumption that China is a socialist country, and then he tries to prove that assumption, but by what the Chinese say about themselves. It is incredible. It defies common sense. However, we will pursue our analysis today by finding out the facts first and then examine the facts about China. The claims that China is a socialist country seem to be based on the following arguments. In China, the state and the party are in control of the economy. A less aggressive foreign policy, military policy of China, compared with other imperialist centers. And the Communist Party in China maintains political power. Now, the first requirement of someone trying to present a country as socialist or otherwise is to refer to the fundamental features and define socialism. The second is to examine the nature of the state and the party which rule the country in question. Socialism, according to the classics, to the founders of the revolutionary theory of scientific socialism, has its own specific laws and requirements, and whoever ignores them sooner or later ends up in revisionism and unscientific, unsubstantiated, wishful thinking. These features of building socialism are: 1, working class power; 2, the socialization of the means of production; 3, a centrally scientifically planned economy; 4, workers' control, not only in the process of production, but in all spheres of political and social life. Socialism abolishes private ownership of the means of production and exploitation of men by men. These are the fundamental features of socialism. Let us now then carefully examine the situation in China and find out the truth as to whether these indispensable facts, features of socialism, do exist in China, and whether the state and the party in China are working class institutions. First, let us have a careful look at the country's economy. China is a country with a population of 1.4 billion people, is the second world economic pair with a GDP of $14 trillion US dollars in 2019. Today, the GDP is over $16 trillion. It's a member of the World Trade Organization. On China's territory operate multinational monopoly corporations in 3 market zones of 14 coastal regions, 6 large cities, and a whole province with a total population of 200 million people. It has 32 million registered private enterprises. The total Chinese investments in the USA in the 3 years 2016 to 2019 varies from 30 billion US dollars to 70 billion US dollars, depending on the trade war between China and USA. While at the same time it holds US public debt in government bonds of over $1.5 trillion. China is the country with the biggest number of billionaires. In 2019, according to the Forbes list, it had 369 billionaires in US dollars. Today, their number has reached 500. The money these billionaires own between themselves equals, and sometimes it's more, than the GDP of medium capitalist countries. The wealthiest person in the country is Jack Ma of Alibaba Company. He is a supporter of the policy of the Communist Party of China, and he is also a supporter of the introduction of a 6-day working week. This charter wants the workers to work for 48 hours a week and be paid the same pitiful wage they receive for 40 hours of work. I have to say a bit more about this character. First of all, Alibaba. The Alibaba Company is in the same line of business as the Amazon. The only difference is the annual transactions of Alibaba are more than double the total of the Amazon and eBay combined together. In other words, the Alibaba Company is the biggest monopoly in the world in this line of business. Now, in the last few years, this character is involved in the process of setting up joint companies in many countries of the world, together with American and Canadian capitalists. He is indeed a fine product and a fine representative of capitalist China. China is the biggest exporting power in the world. In 2019, it exported goods of a value of $2.5 trillion US dollars and imported goods of $2.1 trillion. China's direct foreign investments are constantly increasing. For Asia and Oceania, the region of their immediate interest, these investments have increased from 5.6 billion in 2005 to 38 billion in 2017. Today, they are close to 50 billion. The first destination of Chinese investments in this region is Australia, which is on a world stage, second only to the USA. The state-owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission was founded in 2003 with the aim of restructuring of state enterprises into enterprises controlled by shares through privatizations, sale of assets, and amalgamations and takeovers. In practice, all entities supervised by this commission are structured as companies legally separated from the government with their own board of directors. The private sector is the one which basically moved China's economic development. It contributes 60% of China's GDP, 70% of inventions, 80% of working people in the cities, and provides 90% of all jobs. So 90% of all people employed in China are in the private sector. Private wealth is responsible for 70% of investments and 90% of exports. All exports of China, the 90% of all exports of China, are made by private business. In a space of 20 years, investments in fixed capital of the state enterprises were decreased by 230%, while in 1995, 70% of the total investments took place through state enterprises. In 2018, 1,700 strikes were organized mainly in the free market zones, demanding unpaid wages and allowances, and 11.6% of these strikes were in state enterprises. In their majority, these strikes were met by the iron fist of the state suppressor. Now, let us have a look at the military policy of China. If we have a closer look at China's military policy, we will find out that in the last 3 years, the People's Republic of China has been steadily increasing the state budget military expenses by approximately 7% per annum. In 2019, these expenses amounted to $250 billion, second only to the USA. The reason for this is expressed officially by the Chinese leadership in the following terms: to provide the means of protecting its territorial integrity, the sovereignty, and its interests, according to Fu Ying, representative of the National Assembly of China. China's strategy is not determined by any real threat of invasion, but by the concept that they must be ready to control threats for matters that touch upon the economic security, the uninhibited access to markets and raw materials, and the need to protect them because without them the economy would collapse. It is also the question of projection of power, because for a country to be a great power, it must project its military might. The more the planned Belt and Road Initiative proceeds and a world network of Chinese interests is created, the more China needs to master its military might so it can reach as far away from the mainland as possible. For this reason, military spending is not only increased, but the orientation of Chinese military forces changes from the land to the sea and air, aiming at the better protection of the trade interests of big enterprises developed mainly on the sea routes. In other words, the determining motive for this change is the better shielding of Chinese monopolies against their competitors. The military budget of China does not focus exclusively inward. China disputes the national borders, exclusive economic zones, and continental shelves of neighboring countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines. It participates in military missions beyond its borders. It has military bases abroad, such as the one in Djibouti, with the capacity to accommodate 10,000 army personnel and a port providing anchorage to fast Navy vessels. Before long, we are going to have a Chinese military base in our neighborhood on the Solomon Islands. The agreement has already been signed about that. And also, what is more interesting is that in last month, an agreement was signed between the People's Republic of China and Iran, which provides for Chinese military presence in Iran and a naval base in the Straits of Hormuz, which is one of the most commercially vital waterways in the world. Since the introduction of the Belt and Road Initiative, the patrols in the Indian Ocean by Chinese submarines carrying ballistic missiles have significantly increased. China has upgraded its economic presence in Europe, takes urgent steps to ensure the capacity to have operational control of the Gulf of Aden, since it is a strategic point of passage to the Mediterranean route for the Chinese commodities direct to the European Union. Now, we must now have a look at the party in China. Developments in the Communist Party of China warrant close examination. According to the People's Republic of China Constitution, the Communist Party of China is the party in government. In the middle of the 1970s, when the economic reforms commenced and the policy of opening to the market was introduced, 18.73% of the Communist Party of China members were working people and 40.94% peasants. In 2009, working people were 8.9% and peasants 30.8%. At the end of 2016, the percentage of working people in the Communist Party of the country with the most populous working class in the world dropped to 7.9%. with the change of the party's constitution in 2001, which allowed capitalists to become party members, the percentage of capitalists in the party has increased continuously. A big section of party members are capitalists. The numbers of peasants need some study as well. Many of those are not poor rural workers, but rural capitalists who do not have permission to live in cities according to the Chinese system of hukou. By utilizing the data of migrants in China, we can draw some conclusions about the class composition of the party. In 2016, the percentage of migrant workers in the newly recruited members of the Communist Party of China were only 2.6%, even though the 290 million migrant workers constitute 1/3 of the economically active population. Let us now see how the Chinese themselves conceptualize socialism with Chinese characteristics, because that's how they define their country. It is a socialist country with Chinese characteristics. I quote an excerpt from the book Get to Know the Communist Party of China by the author Li Junru, Foreign Languages publication of the Communist Party of China. I quote, "When Deng Xiaoping requested that the basic principles of scientific socialism be combined with China's particular conditions, the idea sprang up that China is and will be for a long time yet in the first stage of socialism, where socialism can yet apply the market economy, and the essential duty of socialism is to free and develop the productive force, to remove exploitation and polarization in society, and to bring the common well-being. These new theories constitute the base of socialism with Chinese characteristics." This is what they say in a publication of the Communist Party of China. The market economy and the system of share companies is, as explained by Deng Xiaoping, methods which can be applied both in capitalism and socialism as a true reflection of the law of modern social production. Not only Deng Xiaoping, but Mao Zedong as well, defining new democracy, points out it is not the proletarian socialism, nor the democracy of capitalism, but capitalist democracy of a new type led by the proletariat. How can the proletariat lead capitalist democracy? Can anyone explain this to me?
It's a contradiction.
I thought the proletariat would establish a proletarian democracy, not a capitalist one. This thought constitutes the basis of all theoretical forms invented by the Chinese to substantiate their view that socialism with Chinese characteristics is not capitalism with Chinese characteristics. In essence, however, it is simply monopoly capitalism, capitalism in its higher imperialist stage. The data that we explained above substantiates the following fundamental facts. One, the whole purpose of Chinese production is the production of commodities aimed at capitalist profit, whether it is materialized by private or state public enterprise. This is, according to Marx, the basic, essential feature of the capitalist mode of production. This centrally, scientifically planned economy has been rejected in China many decades ago. The market determines what and how commodities will be produced. The private individual ownership assumes gigantic proportions. Chinese monopolies dominate the economic and social life in China, and their dominance is extended globally. In modern China, the contradiction between capital and labor deepens, and consequently, the social contradictions are sharpened. Two, China is not a dependent economy that exports cheap commodities. It is a developed capitalist economy which plays a leading part in a whole series of innovations, fields of modern economy, like telecommunications, networks, computers, while it has significant capital investments internationally in traditional branches of heavy industry, transport, mining, metal and chemical industries, and energy. Three, China has a huge export of capital, as all indications show, that has not been negatively affected despite the trade war with USA, the strongest economy in the world. The Chinese monopolies are in a constant struggle and competition with the monopolies of other strong capitalist countries for the division of markets. At the present stage, they do not only compete, but they capture an important section of the markets. Four, the fact that the Communist Party in China constitutionally holds power, or it is more correct to say they are in government, because being in government does not necessarily make you a holder of power. The real power is in the hands of those who own the means of production. A party oriented towards strengthening the capitalist economy, which ideologically and politically is dominated by capitalists, does not alter one bit the character of the economic base, which is monopoly capitalism. Five, the argument presented about the early stage of socialism and whatever that entails is neither reliable nor sincere. It is an absurdity to compare the small commodity production which survived in the USSR with the gigantic international Chinese monopolies, or to regard what is happening in China as some form of Leninist new economic policy. This argument is nothing but an attempt to cover up the sweeping capitalization of China behind early and immature socialist stages. Since socialism is by itself the transitional period from capitalism to communism, it has specific features. The whole debate about the nature of socialism in stages and its division in early, developed, mature, promotes the logic of development in stages according to national peculiarities. This view, in the final analysis, provides for the alliance of the working class with the bourgeoisie, either totally or with sections of it, in the name of peculiarities. This is vividly illustrated by the creation of special economic zones where a galloping capitalist development takes place with an emphasis on high technology and entailing crushed workers and trade union rights. 7. The analysis which presents China as a state building socialism with Chinese colors defies the rules of socialist building and attempts to justify the development of capitalism and the exploitation of the working class in present-day China, In present-day China, labor power is a commodity. Such analysis by the Chinese damages the communist movement and presents to the world's working people not the necessity and timeliness of socialism, but the example of a state where for a long time the capitalist relations of production have become the dominant feature and its monopolies are expanding globally. It is unfortunate, in our view, that some communist parties and individual communists decided to abandon sound Marxist-Leninist concepts and fundamental principles of scientific socialism and opt for Deng Xiaoping's revisionism and the relevant Chinese unscientific theories which today constitute the guiding principles of China's social development. This, in fact, is diving into revisionism. These ideas are not only harmful for the party in this country, but for the world communist movement. Unless this process of slipping into revisionism is reversed, dire consequences will follow for the working class movement in Australia and globally. Thank you for your attention.